Hi there, I'm Kristen Z. You're watching Getting Answers live on ABC7, Hulu Live, and wherever you stream. We ask experts your questions every day at 3 to get answers for you in real time. Today, a Silicon Valley attorney turned best-selling author of the novel Love Boat Taipei is now a film producer, and she's casting for Hollywood's next young stars. But first, big news on Capitol Hill as a Facebook whistleblower, Frances Haugen, testified today on the failures of the world's largest social media platform. Joining us to talk about what happened today and where we go from here is Ryan Mack, tech reporter for the New York Times. Ryan, how are you? Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so Haugen, who is a former employee, worked at Facebook, said, "I'm here today because I believe Facebook's products harm children, stoke division, and weaken our democracy." Do you think she succeeded in painting a picture that backs up that statement?
Yeah, she was a very credible witness today. She was the only one testifying in front of this Senate Commerce Subcommittee. And not only was she testifying, but she came with thousands of pages of documents that she's handed over to the SEC, to certain congressional offices, and to other lawmakers and regulators. So she's been able to exfiltrate this kind of research, this internal research that many people haven't seen from Facebook, and essentially share it with the world.
Which piece of evidence that she presented do you think was most damning in terms of that intentional knowing something was harmful, yet didn't make the necessary changes because it added to the profit?
Well, I think there's a lot of eye-opening things here in these documents, and they run the gamut here. The thing that's been, I guess, the thing that's gotten the most attention as of late is this internal research on Instagram's impact on teen mental health. And there's some findings in this research that suggest that Instagram can make negative feelings or negative body image feelings worse in teen women, or teen girls, sorry. And that has kind of been the impetus for a lot of lawmakers to push into investigating these issues. That today's hearing was titled Instagram and media and mental health, teen mental health. So
that did get a lot of attention, Ryan. But to me, the biggest point was when allegedly when Facebook noticed that engagement was down a couple years ago with fewer likes and comments, that they purposely changed the algorithm to push posts that would trigger outrage or anger because they got more comments that way.
There's a little bit of nuance there. So in 2018, the change that happened was this pivot towards meaningful social interaction. This idea that you could rank posts in the newsfeed to weight things from your friends and family. So comments from your friends and family would show up, or posts from your friends and family would show up. But it also placed a heavier weight on posts that drove comments and interactions. And what ended up happening here was that these posts, the posts that generated the most comments were those that were polarizing, that drove anger, that drove strong sentiment. And in turn, the algorithm continued to rank those higher in people's feeds. And so you got this kind of positive feedback loop where the kind of most polarizing content would be, I guess, the most rewarded on the Facebook newsfeed.
Right. So Facebook responded today saying, pardon me, Frances Haugen worked for the company less than 2 years, had no direct reports, never attended a decision point meeting with C-level executives, and testified more than 6 times to not working on the subject matter in question. Is this anything but just trying to delegitimize the whistleblower? Do you think she actually, to the general public, or at least to the lawmakers or industry experts, seems legitimate?
Well, it's certainly an attempt to undermine her credibility here. But the fact of the matter is she has tens of thousands of pages or thousands of pages of research at her hands that she shared with these lawmakers. So it's not even like you have to take her word for it necessarily. She has Facebook's word in a lot of these documents and a lot of this research. And so even if Facebook impugns her credibility here, we still have these documents that we can take a look at that show how Facebook is, in some cases, aware of the harm that it perpetuates on the world.
Well, Facebook also said today to suggest we encourage bad content and do nothing is just not true. But it also acknowledged that the internet needs changing, or that we do need rules, kind of like saying, hey, it's not just us and it's not on us. We're actually with you here, that, the whole system needs to be revisited. What do you make of that, and what do you think might actually come out of that?
Well, I think Facebook's playing a very calculated game here because, I mean, for a long time, many critics have pushed for Congress to do something here, to make laws, to oversee these massive tech companies, some that have grown to $1 trillion in market cap. And we've gotten very little to this point. And so Facebook is kind of maybe relying on that a little bit and suggesting that, hey, we'll be in favor of regulation, maybe knowing that we're pretty far away from having any kind of consensus as to what that looks like.
Well, I mean, to regulate, you kind of need to understand the industry. And the problem is, I think a lot on Capitol Hill, you certainly report on it, don't seem to truly understand how can the whole Facebook inner workings become more transparent, short of a leak by a whistleblower all the time, so that decision makers do understand what's happening.
Yeah, I think it's tough. I mean, it's the chicken and egg problem, right? How do they know what to regulate if they can't see what's inside the company? And what you're getting here is this kind of very large document dump that's showing stuff that we've never seen before. And so what's interesting today is you have this kind of bipartisan agreement, senators from both sides of the aisle coming into agreement that what Frances Haugen was showing was very relevant to their interests and probably the first step towards meaningful regulation.
In addition to this kind of bipartisan sentiment that we did see today about needing change, there seems to be kind of a seismic shift in the way Facebook employees feel about their company's work as well, and perhaps that'll make a difference. Can you talk about, I know you interview people who have worked there or are working there now, what is their sense?
Well, it's been interesting. I mean, I've covered this company for about more than 3 years now, and the company has just been hit with crisis after crisis, to the point where Facebook has these internal surveys where they track employee sentiment, and they ask employees, well, do you think Facebook is good for the world? I think that metric now at the company is around the 50% mark, 50 to 60% mark. And so there is a large contingent of people within the company that believe that their products aren't good for the world. I mean, that's kind of telling. And so, I don't know, will we see more people come forward? I think that's a big question mark. Of course, Senator Blumenthal, who led the meeting today, asked for more people in the company to come forward. But it's a tall order, and I think that kind of remains to be seen.
Speaking of Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut, he said the whistleblower wants to fix Facebook, not burn it to the ground. But there are others who say burning it to the ground is exactly what we need, and we don't need to shed a tear, because as dominant and as much as we think we need Facebook now, others will rise, startups, the second Facebook falls. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think there's other competition out there. There's, of course, TikTok and Snapchat. But I think that is one of the more interesting things about this whistleblower, that she wants to fix the company. When it comes to something like antitrust regulation, the FTC is suing Facebook right now for antitrust and wants to break up the company. She believes that's not the path forward in terms of regulating or attaining any type of solution towards the problems that Facebook perpetuates. And so she's actually not in favor of antitrust regulation that the FTC is pursuing. So, yeah, I think with regard to competition, I think Facebook would argue that there are other companies out there, TikTok and Snapchat being among them, but I think it's undeniable. The company has more than 3 billion people on one of its services now who actively use it. And so it's becoming quite a big part of our lives.
It certainly is right now. But as I saw in an op-ed in the New York Times, so probably one of your colleagues today, they wrote about that Facebook is actually in trouble, that what's happening is actually kind of a steady decline by a desperate giant that's dying, and using the fact that it's, losing shares amongst young people as sort of like the evidence. What do you think? Do you think that its inability to attract young people and the sentiment that, young people saying that's for old people, is that a problem for Facebook?
So I think you're referencing a column from my colleague, Kevin Roos, who argued that actually the documents are a very revealing look into Facebook, because they show, especially with the teen stuff, that they're grasping. They're trying to capture a user base that is leaving them. These Gen Z user base that's going to other services, and I think that is one of the more telling parts of these documents, that they're struggling to the point where they can't understand where the next phase of growth is going to be. And I think that's quite revealing. And yeah, I mean, a company like Facebook is driven by growth. What is the next audience segment they can capture? And these documents show that they're kind of grasping at this point.
Look, we have about 30 seconds left, but I'd like to get your thoughts on what reforms you think might be coming most immediately, either in the form of regulation or Facebook's own changes.
I think the most immediate thing, I think both sides of the aisle are currently focused on is teen mental health with regards to Instagram. I think that has a lot of traction behind it. The whistleblower today talked about algorithmic transparency into how things are ranked on news feeds beyond Facebook, on Instagram as well. So I think there's a lot of discussion around that. I think we're still a little far away from actually seeing something like that. There's also been numerous bills that have been proposed, but really no traction on the House floor or the Senate floor. So I think we're still a bit away from actually seeing something coherent on that.
All right, Ryan Mack, tech reporter with the New York Times. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.